it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on that.
Good evening and welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. It is the Retro Show on Wednesday nights and we're looking back at games between Newcastle United and Southampton. It's a big welcome to our new sponsors, which you might have spotted in the new graphics, skipsandbins.com. I like that. That's a really good graphic, and he looks as if he could play on this Friday night as well against Leicester.
Mobile in the midfield.
Definitely. Skipsandbins.com. There you go. There's the telephone number 0800 25 45 25 3. Email inquiries at skipsandbins.com and the website is www.skipsandbins.com. Easy contract, free and pay as you go waste collection. I think of a few players will be sticking in those bins at the end of the season.
The adverts on the telly are quite jolly, actually.
I have got a cracking tune.
Yeah, good stuff. And the eagle-eyed of you will have noticed that the new Three Amigos poster was on there, and there it is. Yeah. So join me, of course, Steve, Keith, and Neil down at Biker Grove on Friday night. Keith looks really good as Ant McPartlin there, doesn't he?
He does.
And as for Steve looks like a very good Jeff. I think it's Jeff or Nick, unless he's Deck. I'm not on earth sure what I look like, but I look as if I should be in some kind of, I don't know, like cage or something. It's a cross between...
You look like the lad from Deliverance, Steve. You should have a banjo.
Yeah, I think so. And I've got no idea who I'm standing with, but yeah, what a strange one. But yeah, thanks for that, The Biker Grove poster is there, and that'll be yes, we are doing the Three Amigos 5:30 on Friday night. Long session by me because obviously Newcastle play against Leicester 8:00 kickoff, and it'll be a 7:30 start for the match day live on Friday. A lot of people asking about the Amigos, but yeah, definitely be going ahead. Also, I might as well do the rest of the sponsor shout outs instead of later on. Spider VPN for all your internet security. Of course, that is your one of our main sponsors for the last few months, and they've agreed to sponsor us again this month. And qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend and Newcastle. They have come on board right at the start of the show, and they've been with us ever since. Big shout out to John and to Jab Signature as well. Big shout out to John, who's got his new label coming out later this year. If you're a first time visitor to the channel, hit the Newcastle Legends logo in the bottom right hand corner, and that's it. You've subscribed. Hit the thumbs up to like the video, click share to share it to your social media, and join the chat by going into the comments section and chatting with like-minded Newcastle United fans. If you want to get us on other platforms, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, wherever you get your podcasts, and you can listen to us when you're out walking the dog. I'll also give that a plug as well. The NUFC Fans Foodbank.co.uk. The Matchday Bucket will be operational as always on Friday night. Just like going and giving your cans and food to the food bank on a match day, you can donate financially across the World Wide Web on match day night. And last but by no means least, the new t-shirt is on my Twitter. This one will be popular with Julie, no doubt, who's a big fan of the cat. Hashtag Troll of the Week t-shirt. There's the cat in action on his computer, and that's a rather snazzy dark blue number, and it's the first dark blue NUFC Matters t-shirt that we've had for the food bank. So get your bids in. It's pinned to my social media, Twitter account, @Steve Wraith. Get your bids in, and all the proceeds from all of our t-shirts go to the food bank. And I think Steve on Friday should have some kind of total for us so far as to how much we've raised. So look forward to that. So without further ado, let us get to George for his first Southampton game.
Well, tonight, lads, the theme about my two games are centre forwards. One of my favourite topics in football always, and both the games was at, and part of the reason I was at them was because there was something I wanted to see related to the centre forwards playing in the games. The first one is 29th of April, 67, and the centre forward who was really hot then was our very own Wyn Davies. He was playing in a run of form at that time where he was practically untouchable. And in the first half, he just ran Southampton ragged. And by half-time, we were 3 up. Goals by Wyn himself, Peter Noble and Brian Robson. And the other two were set up by Wyn Davies knockdowns and layoffs and that sort of thing. He was just unplayable in that particular game. And our team was quite a good one, actually. Marshall, Craig, Clark, Elliott, McNamee, Ailey, Robson, Hilly, Davis, Noble, and Bennett and Noble. And they were playing really, really good football, but led by Wyn Davies, as I say, who was untouchable at 3-0. The other part of the game was another centre forward got involved. The second half, a young man by the name of Martin Chivers appeared in the Southampton side. He was huge. I mean, I hadn't seen him in the flesh before, but I hadn't realised just how big he was. I mean, he was so tall and broad, he even made McNamee look quite small. And within a minute of the start of the second half, he got Southampton back into the game, and he caused us all sorts of bother. Southampton at that time had a number of great players, some coming to the end of their careers, some still making their way in the game. But in the front line, for example, as well as Chivers, there was Jimmy Melia, who had got from Liverpool, whose career was supposed to be over when he left Liverpool. But he got a new lease of life when he went to Southampton, and he really had another career with them. He even got back into the England team with them, and he was excellent. And then I was trying to think how to compare him with the modern day footballers, and the most polite way I could say was he was a Shelby with some bottle and some guts. He had the long ball, he had the short ball, he could score a good goal, and he really was a talented player. But as I say, he could keep going for quite a long time. Playing on the right wing was Terry Payne, who was England right winger then. Very quick, very tricky. Give our fullbacks quite a hard time, especially in the second half. And of course, in the forward line as well was Mick Shannon, who was the current England player at the time, and another Ron Davis made up the rest of their line. And the second half was much more even, but largely because of the big centre forward. What a difference he made. Wyn Davies still kept pressing them, but the fact that we had to look after Chivers in the way that we did took a bit of the pressure off our defence. The other thing I wanted to mention in that game is it was nice to see two managers, Joe Harvey and Ted Bates, both of whom did the lot. You know, played for the team, captained the team, and then went on to manage their team. Joe Harvey for us and Ted Bates for Southampton. And Ted Bates had a good reputation in football. So it was nice to see those two old gentlemen of football battling out against each other. But a 3-1 win to the Magpies in a very good game. And the crowd was 42,500, which was quite good for that particular season. So that's my first one. 3-1 in April '67.
Good stuff. Mitch, over to you, mate.
Southampton's always been a team I've enjoyed watching play. For me, they've always had this combination of three things: exciting young talent coming through that they've not been frightened to play, experienced players who've gone there and they're getting a second lease of life in their career, and they always seem to try and play good football. So they're one of these teams you like to go up against. My first games in March '87. That season was started appallingly. We were up and down, all really rarely out of the bottom half of the table. By March time, we'd lost, I think, 8 and 12, and we were rock bottom. But this was the game that then inspired me to go on and manage to avoid relegation. And the two players that we were thankful for that were Goddard and Gaza. And this game was all about Paul Goddard and Paul Gascoigne. And you've heard me go on about this on the show before. Probably one of our most underrated players, Paul Goddard, in terms of what he could do, what he delivered, and what he did for the club. Always had a goal in him, but always was able to hold the ball up, bring other people into play. The game itself, like I say, was all about Goddard and Gaza and a certain Peter Beardsley. The first half saw Beardsley dink the lovely little cross for Goddard to head in. And the second half, the second goal, probably one of the best counter-attacking goals I've seen at St James's Park. They were breaking through on the edge of the 18-yard box. I think it was Neil McDonald slid in, took the ball off the toes of the striker. He then just kept going with it, went out to the left-hand side. And then there was a fantastic sort of four-way interplay between McDonald, Wharton, I think Beardsley and Goddard that stuck Wharton through. And basically all he had to do was roll it across the box and Gaza tapped it in at the Gallagher end. And the Gallagher end went mental. And that win was vital that season at keeping us up. It was the catalyst for making sure we had this great escape that season. And it was down to two players, one who we didn't see enough, well, probably both who didn't see enough of in a black and white shirt, but for different reasons. But I think the contribution that Paul Goddard made that season still remains very, very underrated amongst the fan base.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. George, yeah, that game you mentioned, did you say 67?
Yes.
There you go, look. A rare photograph from that game.
Yes, indeed.
Only photograph I can find, and there's Wyn Davies there.
And look at how many defenders are around him. There's four defenders and a goalkeeper, and they're all within touch of distance of Wyn Davies. That's the sort of terror he put on. And that's in the background, that's Dave Hilly, I think.
Brilliant. Is that looking towards the east stand, George?
Yeah. I'm actually on that picture. I'm there.
You're on that picture?
Popular side, yes.
Yeah.
Can you blow it up? Can you blow it up?
It's a new Friday night game. Spot Steve Wilkinson. We'll bring it in. Instead of spot the ball, you've got to put a cross around where Steve Wilkinson's standing, where he is in the crowd.
I would give you a rough idea that I'm on that picture. No, I don't think so.
Man, Jesus.
It was a beautiful blue sky. You cannot see from the colour there, but it was a beautiful blue sky. So when you can see the shadows on the players, so the sun was out. It was a beautiful day. But can I just mention the reason why we went there? We were going the Gallagher end, and George, remember there was a big hoo-ha game against Everton about February.
Yeah.
Before that, it kicked off in the Leazes end. And because in them days they didn't segregate the fans, and it kicked off in the Leeds end, bottles were thrown and all sorts. Everton were 3-0 up in about a quarter of an hour, and me and my dad started to decide after that to go to the popular side. We went down roughly somewhere on that picture there.
Brilliant. So I'm glad I found that. See,
that's great. Yeah,
pays to do a bit of research. Go on then, Steve. On to your game. Your first game.
Well, I was probably in the same place for this game because it's the game after. The next time we played Southampton after the one that George was talking about. But I wanted more to put it in the context of the situation. I can't actually remember much about the game other than the fact that it was a beautiful sunny day again. First game of the season, that game that George talked, I think it was the last home game of the season. I think we had a couple of games after that, but it was the last home game of the season. And strangely enough, the first home game in the following season was Southampton again. And on the August 1967, and we won 3-0 on that game, and it was again the opposite of what George talked about, 0-0 half time. But shortly after half time, we got into the game, and Jim Scott scored, and then soon after Albert Bennett scored, and then about quarter of an hour from the end, Tommy Robson. But I wanted to talk about the context of the position at that time, because that season that George talked about, it was the second season up, and we struggled actually. We were down near the relegation zone, and it was obviously there was no transfer window then, but there was a deadline in March. But in the December, we sold Alan Suddock, who was probably the star man at the time, young lad that went on and had a decent career at Blackpool. We sold him to, but the money we got off Alan Suddock, we bought three players that with first division experience. Dave Elliott from Sunderland, Big John McNamee, a great centre half from Hibernian actually, and Tommy Robson, a winger from Chelsea, and they sort of had more solidarity to the team, along with the sort of thing that George talked about, Wyn Davies up front and some of the established ones, and then Pop Robson was starting to come through as well. We'd finished that previous season on a good run of home games, particularly. We'd won 6 out of the last 7, and avoided relegation, even though it was quite close. But the season after was the sort of build up to what was a really good season, in as much as we ultimately qualified for the Fairs Cup. And one of the things, contrary to how it is today, we had a prolific home record. We actually we had in those days there was 42 games, so you played 21 home games. We won 12 and drew 7, and the only 2 games we lost were right at the end of the season. We lost against Spurs, and we lost the last game of the season against Man City. But while at one stage we'd been 5th, we went on to be 10th, and it was a bit like the sort of ESL situation in our favour then, because the one city, one club rule that got us into the Fairs Cup was in our favour. You had two teams in Liverpool, so only one of them got through. 2 in Manchester, so only one of them got through. Loads in London, but again, only one got through to the thing. So the rules, even in those days, they weren't happy. The big, however many there were at that time, weren't happy with how we, as a single club city, managed to get in from 10th top when teams above us didn't get into Europe. So even then, they were probably marking our card in those days to how they look at us now. But that was a good season. We're pretty prolific at home. As I say, we had a good record. Not long after that, again, through the power of Wyn Davies, we beat Chelsea 5-1 at home. And so it was a good position, and it went on to sort of establish yourself as a first division team for what I think was the second longest time we've stayed in the first division, right up to the end of the 70s. Only the Keegan era and the Bobby Robson up to the Ashley time was the longest time we've been in the first division. So we've bounced up and down the rest of it. So that's my first recollection of a game against Southampton.
Good stuff. Okay, Stu, over to you, pal.
Well, the first game I wanted to talk about was also in 1967, but I can't because I wasn't born then, and the 2 lads have covered it anyway. So. The game I do want to talk about, the first one, is in May 2004. It was 6 days after we just got beat off Marseille in the UEFA Cup semi-final by Didier Drogba-inspired Marseille. And when I knew we were doing Southampton, I was really happy because this was one of my favourite away trips. It wasn't like the game was great as well, but when you remember trips, the games, it's very rarely the game you remember, it's everything around it. But before I talk about the game, I did some research on that season because I was still living in Tenerife at the time. I'd flown back about 6 times for games. And this was just after my 30th birthday, but if any season typified Newcastle United, for me, it was this one. And I'll just give you a rundown. A few things I wrote down was the year before we finished 3rd and we qualified for the Champions League, only then to be knocked out by Partizan Belgrade after winning away 1-0. Only Newcastle could do this. So we also had a fantastic opportunity to build on and push on and, add a few quality players. And we really could have went somewhere that season. Yeah, we didn't spend any money, and we only got Lee Boyer in on a free, and I think it was Bridges. He was on a loan. I think Michael Bridges was on a loan. Now, we didn't win our first league game that season until October, but then in typical Newcastle fashion, they go and win 6 of the next 7 and draw in one of them. And we sold. When I said we brought Boyer, and I wrote it down, we outwent that season Solano, Court, Dabizas, Acuna and Caldwell left, and we only got Boyer and Bridges in, so the team was invariably weakened throughout that season. And when those players went, especially one of them, it then ended the infamous joke of naming 6 Newcastle players in one sentence, which was Shearer, Court, Bellamy, given Dyer, Speed. And Court got sold. So we couldn't use that anymore. So we started the season week up, but also this is the time when the stadium was now up to 52,000, and we had a new breed of fans, not the ones that we'd been talking about from even the Keegan years, like 7 or 8 years before that, or well before that, as most of us go back, or all of us go back. Where they want to be entertained and they expect to win, and they didn't expect Champions League football. It was demanded, and anyone with a semblance of a brain could think, well, hang on, you've just sold some of your best players and you haven't really added to it. So my concern is when we get taken over, that the same thing will happen again. We'll get new breed of fans, I was expecting, but that's for another time. So back to the game. My 30th birthday was flying in from Tenerife on the Sunday night. The heat says, leave the travel arrangements to me. We had arranged to stay at my friend's Tony's, who I mentioned won that $1.6 million in Vegas. He'd won that a few years ago. So I arranged to stay there. Now, he moved to Rains Park. So normally if you drive down, you can drive down to London 4 or 5 hours, go around M25, cutting the A3 across the bridge at Kingston, and you're straight into Rains Park. It's quite easy to drive to. But he'd wanted us to get there another way. So he says, look, he met me at the airport on Sunday night, and he says, we'll be back here. We'll be back here on Tuesday morning. And I says, we're flying to Southampton. He went, no, that was too expensive. We're flying to Stansted. So I was like, right. Stansted's nowhere near Rains Park, and it's nowhere near Southampton. Yeah, but I got a good deal on the flights. All right, off we go. So we end up in Stansted, then have to get an overhead into London, then have to get the tube down to somewhere else, then get a taxi. It was proper planes, trains, and automobiles just to get to Rains Park. So instead of getting there at 3 in the afternoon, we got there about 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. And Tony had put a bit weight on with the all, I think he'd been enjoying his success. So he bought some Yorkie bars, and he was putting them on the side of his face and calling Tony a lorry driver. And Tony was then getting magazines on his forehead and calling himself Heath. And so this banter went on, and we ended up having an all-night, we'll say, a drinking session. And I went to bed at, it was 4, 5 in the morning. And them two were still up bantering with each other and laughing and everything else. So at 8 o'clock, we had to leave. And I had 3 hours sleep, so I become the designated driver of Tony's brand new car. And again, the heat had got us into... nothing happened to the car. The heat had organised accommodation for the 3 of us. And he booked us in the Holiday Inn. So he's put it on the sat-nav, Holiday in Southampton. He went, no, it's not in Southampton. I've got one for a £5 a night cheaper. And it's in Shirley. So I don't know if anyone knows that part of the world, but it's in between Southampton and Portsmouth. It's a bit like saying you're staying in, I don't know, South Shields rather than Newcastle or something. And it's not the most, let's say it's in need of, well, it was in need of some urban regeneration. And so basically, because we had been drinking all the time, we just parked the car, checked in, threw the bag onto the bed, and thought, right, we'll just have to keep drinking. So we went into Shirley High Street. And there's bars when you're walking and everyone stops and stares at you. And it was just like that. So we scurried into the snug where there was a pool room, and we started playing pool. And this guy kept coming in, offering us different sort of substances. So then after about an hour, we ended up calling him Boots the Chemist, because he had every single pharmaceutical option you wanted or didn't want. It was just, so I had to get rid of him. Ginger Tim, the Hull fan who I mentioned last week, he's since then moved to Southampton, so we'd arranged to meet him for a few drinks before the game. And he'd been up to Newcastle loads of times, spent many weekends with us on the drink and everything else. And we met him about 5:30. Now, we've been drinking since opening time, and that's like all through the night before. And he's like, I can't believe the state of you three. So you just won't get in the game. You won't get in St. Mary's. So we end up drinking vodka and Red Bull to wake us up. And as we're going into the ground,
because that always helps.
Yeah, of course it does. as we're going into the ground, he'd come up with one of his all-time classic one-liners. He says, "Don't worry, Tony, about getting in. I've had a word with the stewards. They're going to open the double emergency exit door so you can squeeze in your fat." And I won't say the last word. So we're all laughing at that. And we're getting in, and then Tony was like, I can't believe you, Geordie's one. He says, you drink too much. Can you all be quiet? And he was like, because the noise was incredible, because we were only 2 games away. If we'd won the last 2 games, which was Southampton away, and then we had Liverpool away. If we'd won both of them, we would have pipped Liverpool for the Champions League's 4th spot by the fact that we beat Liverpool at Anfield, but we didn't. We ended up drawing with them. So the game ends up being 3-3 classic. We were 1-up, 2 down. I think we went down. I've got it written down. Beat equalised for us, and then Titus put an own goal in here. We were 2-1 down. Then we got a 2s each. Then the second half, Newcastle absolutely battered them. We knew we had to win. It was like the Alamo. It was really very rarely you get one of these games watching Newcastle where they're just constantly pressurised. And it was chance after chance. Shearer had a couple of chances. And they had a goalkeeper called Antiniemi, who I knew because he used to play for Hearts. And he was injured. So they had a young kid in, I don't know the young lad's name, and he was making his debut. Yeah, Boyer scored the second one, yeah. And they were making his debut, and he made a save from Shearer from a header from 6 yards out. That was given his Sky Sports save of the season, and it was his debut. Then Customary Newcastle, they score right at the end. That was the first one, I believe. They scored right at the end. 88th minute to go 3-2 up. And you think, this is just typical Newcastle. We've ran them ragged, seriously had them pinned back. Just as good as any like Man City game this season. You know, if you watch them in the Premier League, Newcastle destroyed them. And then 3-2 down. And we then go and equalise in the 92nd minute, straight from Ambrose, who scored near the end. We knew that we weren't going to get Champions League, but the fans who had made the effort, as always and as usual, were fantastic. We end up then going back into Southampton. Tim very quickly made his excuses to leave us. So eventually, after the nightclub closed, we went back to this Holiday Inn. And like most Holiday Inns in those times, you always get travelling reps, you know, whether they're selling pens or whatever, or they're there for meetings. And there was this guy, I remember he was like from Derby, and he just wanted to speak to us. So you can imagine we weren't quiet, you know, we're very like boisterous and vociferous at this stage. This is like nearly 2 full days on the drink. And he started talking, I want to buy you a drink. No, we can buy our own. And he'd go, Tony's a millionaire, he can buy you one. But, you know, you're from Newcastle, it comes natural. So we allow the guy to buy us a drink, and then he wants to stay in our company, and we end up having a bit crack. And the guy goes to bed. So this is now, what, 4 in the morning. They said they've got to close the bar to tidy up for breakfast and everything in the morning. So he'd ordered, I think it was 12 bottles of Stella. He says, put them on that guy's tab, because he said he was paying for our drinks. And off we went, and again, no sleep. And we're checking out at 10 in the morning. This guy standing there with his big bill like this, like trying to like itemize it and checking it out and everything else. We ended up having to, again, I had to drive back to Rains Park, where we thought, well, we'll just have a chilled out afternoon, but we didn't. We ended up on the Peeve again. So just like being in Dubai, Mitch, this. Just on the Peeve again, and then flew back to Newcastle the next day. Just on the thing of Dubai, I'm going there in 2 weeks because a friend of mine, Mitch's, is his 60th birthday. So it's taking me more last over to surprise him, because he's well fond of her. He gave her away when we got married. Only to find out yesterday that going to surprise him, he surprised me. He's not going to be there. And the flights and hotels and everything. So,
He's not.
I don't know what we're going to do, Mitch, for five nights. It's a 6 nights, 6 nights. I don't know what we're going to do.
That's outrageous.
Sure we'll
what are we going to do? What are we going to do for 5 nights without Bobby's birthday to celebrate?
On the Wednesday, bit of retro show in. So that was my long story. Don't worry. My next match is really, really quick. So sorry for taking up so much time.
Don't worry, Steve Hasty.
Right, well, I struggled here because I was trying to pick a game when Stewie wouldn't have been on the drink. So I've gone for, and obviously a one that he'd remember. So I've gone for the 11th of December 1975. I think he was 1. So that's my choice. Jeff put a little thing up early doors there. It's the Texaco Cup final, 11th of December 1975. Freezing cold. 19,288. Texaco Cup was one of those competitions that were put in by Texaco, who were one of the oil companies that in the early 70s, when decided that they were gonna branch out and they were gonna put
petrol stations everywhere, and they were good sponsors for about 4 or 5 years. We were in this competition with the elite. By the way, we had it was kind of the precursor to the Anglo-Scottish. We had Aberdeen, we had Ayr United, we had Hearts and Rangers. They were the 4 Scottish clubs in it. But the biggies at the time that we had were Birmingham, Blackpool, Carlisle, Luton, Borough, obviously ourselves, Norwich, Oldham, Orient, Peterborough, Sheffield United, Southampton, obviously, West Ham and West Brom. And I've missed off a team. I'm surprised. I don't know why I'd missed it. So I was going down the list there. Man City. Don't know whether you ever heard of them. Apparently they apparently played last night and they did okay. But that was they were the teams that were selected to play in the Texaco Cup. In other words, clubs that had nothing else to play for while European games were on, and were happy to travel and keep themselves entertained until the FA Cup started in the January, because the final was in December. So we turned up. It was 0-0. It was 1-0. We lost in the first leg, but we quickly came back in the second leg with a goal by someone whose career was kind of coming to the end, and then was farmed off in '76 by Gordon Lee. That was John Tudor. He was actually substitute at the time. He came on for Ray Rocky Hudson, who I think we spoke about either last week or the week before. I'm not too sure, but John came on and scored the equaliser. And as I say, a freezing cold night in December. You only took with extra time, didn't it? So we had another 30 minutes to suffer in the freezing cold. I remember I was in the paddock at the time. I don't know why we're getting the paddocks. Bear in mind, there was only 19,288 at the game. But that's where we ended up, me and I think it was Tony, my pal, and a couple of other lads. But we came in the second half or in extra time, and we had goals from Alex Bruce, who had been bought on the strength of the money that we'd made getting into the FA Cup final in '74. But I think he came to the club in January '74. He was already cup tied. His career stalled in Newcastle somewhat because of that, and because of our cup run. And of course, not only that, but our cup run was one of those cup runs in '74 where we played replay after replay after replay. In some cases, we played 2 replays. So that the lad never really got that sequence of games, but he stepped up and he scored. And then the final goal was from a local lad, Paul Cannell. And we won the cup. We won it 3-1 on aggregate, as I say, after extra time. The team was McFall, Natras, Clark. I think there must have been some injuries here going on, because obviously Hudson was in midfield. 2 central defenders were Jeff Lawton and Paddy Howard. Mickey Burns, Supermac, Cannell, Bruce, and Alan Kennedy in midfield. Obviously, again, that Alan Kennedy being recognised as a left fullback, was playing on the left side of midfield. But it was great to think that I actually saw we win something at St James's Park and win a trophy and actually have it displayed around the pitch. And then I think we ended up missing the bus home back to Heaton, and I think we ended up having to get the train or something daft like that. But it was that was my first recollection of Southampton, and they've always been an interesting team. And Mitch mentioned earlier about them, and but when you looked at the fixtures and you look at some of the games we've had, lots and lots of high scoring games against them. One of those clubs now, plenty 3-0s, 4-1s, 5-0s, 5-1s. Invariably, they beat us down there. We didn't have a good record at Dell, and vice versa. They didn't travel very well up here. And also interesting, I don't know about you guys, but when I was looking back at ex-players or players who had played for both clubs, and you go through the book, you actually see that, I don't know what's the distance, but there's not many players. And also when you go through the history, and like we do on this show, you notice that there's, especially in the earlier years that we've looked at, players tended to not travel any further south than Yorkshire or places like that, or into Lancashire, and for to have players that were moving from Newcastle to Southampton and vice versa is quite interesting. But we've got plenty of games that we can talk about where there were plenty of goals. That's the good thing about the games against Southampton.
Yeah, John Mitchison asks you a question, George, before you get your second game. He says, do you remember the game in 71 at home to Southampton when the match was 2-2 and John McGrath scored and ran past Joe Harvey and gave him the V sign?
I do indeed. I would love to have heard the words that Joe Harvey shouted at him as he went past him, giving him the V sign. I think the origin of that, of course, is that John McGrath felt that Joe Harvey had let him down and pushed him out of Newcastle United. So that was John, in his way, getting his own back. But as I say, I couldn't help but notice that there was a nice stream of words came out of Joe's mouth as he passed. So I'd love to have known what all that was. But I do remember it very well, yes.
Go on then, George. Give us your second game, mate.
16th of November 2002. We beat Southampton 2-1. And again, the theme of is centre forwards again, because Southampton had in their team somebody that the southern journalists were pushing for England. In fact, the government, the England team, and that's James Beattie, who people have already talked about tonight. And what a strong and quick player he was. And you know, a lot of the press gang were talking about the new Shearer. Well, who has an opportunity to see the new Shearer played on the same field as the original? And I've got to say, within 5 minutes, Beattie showed his potential, because he put Southampton one up. He just sailed through the defence, pushed people out of the way, and slammed the ball into the back of the net past Shea Given. 51,800 at the match. And this is a Bobby Robson team against a Gordon Strachan team, of course. And Beattie gave us quite a run around in the first half, and he was difficult to get hold of. In the second half, things quietened down a little bit, because a young man by the name of Andy Griffin got a hard tackle onto Beattie, and Beattie could hardly walk after that. So he wasn't much of a danger after that. But Shearer then took over, of course, and he didn't score himself, but he laid on 2 goals, one for Amiobi and one for Aaron Hughes, a rare one for Aaron Hughes. It was an interesting team, because we had some players who we hope would be great potential. Hugo Viana, for example, I always hoped he would be a tremendous player for us, and just occasionally the touches came out, but not often enough for him to be a regular Premier player before he went back to Portugal, and then eventually fulfilled his potential. I mean, he was regarded as the top under-18 player in the world when Bobby Robson signed him, but he never came to the fore, unfortunately. But in the same team, you had Given, you had Andrew O'Brien, Griffin, Steve Colwell, Aaron Hughes, Genus, Dyer, Speed, Viana, Shearer, and Amiobi. And as I say, Shearer took over in the second half and took the game away from Southampton. And I have to say, in the first half, while Beattie was in the ascendancy, of course, Shea Given earned his money, because he made some tremendous saves to keep winning the match. There could easily have been 2 or 3 up at half time if it hadn't been for Shea Given. So that's my second game, 2-1 to us, but an excellent game with centre forwards to the fore once again.
Good stuff. Mitch, over to you for your second game.
I was torn between 2 games. I was going to talk about my one and only trip to the Dell to make the point, but I can make the point without talking about the game, about how our trips to Southampton were regularly moved to stupid times. And it's one of the classic examples about how the TV companies and the game administrators really don't care about fans. And they certainly care less about travelling fans than about the arrangements you make. You know, Stu's telling you a story about booking flights, booking hotels, and then the game gets moved to the next day. What do you do? And how do you sort it out? And do you get refunds? Or you know. And I remember when we were involved with the trust in the Houghton promotion season, we had 3 games rearranged at the end of the season, including one trip to Plymouth that I think was moved to a Tuesday night or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was ridiculous. It was properly ridiculous. And when we raised the point with the Football League basically wrote back and said, if Sky say that's when it is, that's when it is. We've got no control over it. And that was the point I was going to make out of that trip, but it was a loss, and I didn't want to talk about a loss. I will talk about another high-scoring game, and the reason for it is connected to that loss at the Dell. It's December 1988, and it's Newcastle 3, Southampton 3. And this was the first game that we were introduced to a name that gave our fans a decade of pain every time we played Southampton, and that was Matt Le Tissier. That was Matt Le Tissier's first game against us for Southampton as a 19-year-old. And it was a humdinger of a game. We were certainly in a transition, and we had a funny sort of mix of the squad. They really were. They had a spine of sort of experienced players, Mills and Case and people like that. But then they let the youngsters play and go wild around them, and they were very, very good to watch. We went 1-0 up after about 7 minutes with Kevin Brock, and then on 16 minutes, Matt Le Tissier made his entrance with a corking goal, really, and his second about 15 minutes later was even better, and that was Matt Le Tissier's name etched onto Newcastle fans' minds. Second half didn't get off to a great start. Another name that I've already seen mentioned in the chat, Rod Wallace. I think he's the oldest of the Wallace brothers. Made it 3-1 after 55 minutes. And the key change for us was on 60 minutes when a fading Mirandina was replaced by a young Irishman called Michael O'Neill. Michael O'Neill, I think, in this game, I think scored his 5th and 6th goals in 5 games. And he was really making a name for himself. And boy, what a change that was. 66 minutes, O'Neill 2-3. And then we absolutely battered. I know Stu was talking about, you get to this point where you're just throwing everything at them. Even Rob McDonald hit the crossbar. It was, everything was going on. I think Tim Flowers, was playing a goal for them then, and he made some fantastic saves. Would it be Tim Flowers then? I'd have to check.
I think it was.
Yeah, I'd have to. I think it was. And then absolutely on the stroke of full time, Michael O'Neill makes it 3-3. He goes wild. Crowd goes wild. We scraped a draw. That was certainly deserved on the strength of the last half hour. That second half possession. The thing about that Southampton team at the time, it did have a lot of young kids in, and they were knackered by the end. They'd ran themselves into the ground. But that was the introduction of a young Matt Le Tissier, and he was the reason we lost in my one and only trip to the Dell. Was that goal he scored where he topped it over the top of Venison and then volleyed it into the back of the net, And we had a decade of that off him. He always seemed to turn it on against us. He always seemed to find another level against us. He seemed to enjoy it. And I'm sure his performances against us were one of the reasons eventually he got some big chances in the England team.
Oh, definitely got him recognition. There's no doubt about that. Great stuff. Steve Wilkinson?
Yeah, and I think just going back to Mitchell's story, they always seem to have those games on the telly. They always seem to pick Newcastle and Southampton down there. So
it's ridiculous. It doesn't just happen to us, though, Steve. You look at the Mackhams, they regularly get sent to places like Portsmouth on a Sunday evening where there's no chance of getting home.
Yeah,
and it's ridiculous. It's just a total disrespect to the travelling fan base, because you've got 2 choices: travel on a coach and you're travelling forever, or you've got to book overnight accommodation and you're shelling out extra money to follow your team.
Yeah.
Aye.
Okay. Well, my second game it's again in a position of when it where we should have pushed on. It's 2013, February 2013. Another 6 goal thriller. We've had 2 already from Stu and Mitch. This time was a win. We beat them 4-2. at home. And it was the season when we should have pushed on with actually investing, having finished 5th and qualifying for the Europa League the year before. We'd had the phase of bringing in decent players like Kabay and Sissoko that were strengthening the team, and we had Papi Cisse scoring and banging goals in. And it's the time we should have invested, and it's the start of the decline that we've had now, really, that actually didn't invest. And as was always the case with many of the teams that have played in the Europa League, the Thursday, Sunday, when you've got a small squad, is hit you. And this season we're kind of suffered, and we're finished mid-table at the end of it. But this particular game featured probably one of the best goals Cisse scored for us. The game started and they went ahead in the 3rd minute, Schneiderlin scoring, and then Sissoko scored a tap in on about half an hour. Then about the goal of the game was from Cisse just before half time, and it was Robbie Elliott was in goal, and he put a long ball up, and I think it was Gutierrez, and another guy went up for it. I think they both missed it, and it landed just over their heads, and Cisse can hardly have seen it. Must have been coming over the shoulder, and he hit a half volley from about 25-30 yards, and it just dipped over the keeper like a rocket into the back of the net at the Leazes end. And it was, I think it ranks up with one of those goals a bit like Shearer's volleys against Everton and Villa that we talk about. But apart from the fact that Cisse scored some great goals, particularly the Chelsea goal down there, I think it was one of Cisse's best goals, and that put us in front in that game. And then they equalised soon after half time. It was a ding dong game. At the time they had Pochettino was manager, and it was this phase that Southampton were into of having good players but then selling them. So you had people like Lallana playing, Luke Shaw was playing, and then they always seem to sell these type of players, and they got into that phase, Southampton, for a few years of doing that. So they had quite a decent team, but then we went ahead, and then the game finished with a bizarre own goal where the ball was sort of hovering around the edge of the 6-yard box, and the Southampton tried to clear it, and it bounced off the back of the head of one of their blokes and went into the goal, and we won 4-2. So, but it as well as we carried on and ultimately lost to Benfica that season, the last game we played in Europe, and hopefully it's not too long before we'll have it again, but I don't think it'll happen under Ashley. That season we just didn't build on what we should have done, and then that was the disappointing thing. But again, when we play Southampton, it's another high scoring game. So that was my second game.
Great stuff. As always, Stu, over to you, mate.
In line with the 6-goal games, I went to something often referred to as the middle season, the 94-95 season. When again, typical Newcastle, we win 15 of the first 17 games, drawn the other 2. So that was game 3, a nice sunny August afternoon. One of my, if it wasn't my favourite partnership, it would be definitely in the top 3 of watching Newcastle, and that was Cole and Beardsley. Unfortunately, Beardsley was injured for this game, so another player who was hugely underrated, just like Paul Goddard was, played for Newcastle. I was actually at Newcastle Boys with him. He's exactly 1 week older than me. It's Stevie Watson. To me, he was England class, and if he's kept one position, whether it be centre half, he was a better centre half than right back anyway. But if they kept in one position, to me, he would have played for England and been a regular. But he became like a makeshift midfielder, and he scored the first 2 within the first half hour. The first goal he scored, he absolutely. Thankfully, there was a net there, like, because I think the ball still would have been travelling now. He just hammered it in. We're 2-0 up. Then my main man, Mr. Andy Cole, notched. Then we scored again. Cole set up, I think it was Rob Lee for the last one. So Andy Cole's second goal was like a 20-yarder. He never had much power when he was hitting from distance, but they always seemed to find the back of the net. And this was one of them. But as I said, he set up Rob Lee for the next one. And we had a good feeling, as I said, we'd finish third and we'd start the season really well. This is the 3rd game in a row that we won. And then after the 17th game, we went, I think it was like 3 months before we won an away game again after that. So not to be what it was, but Andy Cole, everyone left the match singing the Andy Cole song, which is one of my favourites. The bars were bouncing with it. You know, times on Tyneside were good. And then 5 months later, he got sold to Man United. Again, typical Newcastle. So that was my second game. So that's 12 goals in 2 games.
Fantastic. Great stuff. Goals, goals, goals. Ding dongs at the Dell. Steve, you're the final game tonight.
I am, and I was going to pick
a 0-0.
No,
Nil-nil.
I was going to pick your game, Mitch. I was going to pick your game. That was because that game for me, that Michael O'Neill, you know, the fact that Mirandina went off, he came on. I was going to pick that one, but I've gone right up to date. I've gone to February this year, right? I've gone to a game where it was one of the most craziest games I think I've seen involving Newcastle for God knows how long. That infamous February 2021 3-2. It's not that long ago, and I was gonna say there. Can you remember it, lads? Can you remember? You know, let's have a look. Let's have a look. We went 2-0 up. We had Willock scoring on his debut. We go 2-0 up with Almiron. 26 minutes gone. It's Paul Moraine. Then Millamino scored for them. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say against the run of play, but they got a goal, and it was typical Newcastle, you know, overconfident and let the lad in. We then had 2 players injured. We had Wilson go off with a hamstring. We had Manquillo go off with which I think was an ankle injury. We then went 3-1 up on the stroke of half time, again with Almiron, 2 goals. We'd seen ASM getting down the byline and pulling the ball back for the first goal. Everything seemed to be, you know, it seemed to be falling into place. We then got Hendrick sent off. We had Shaw going off injured, so we played half an hour with 10. We played 20 minutes with 9. They scored a goal. And it was kind of like the Alamo, and we just probably all sat where we were watching it, just like biting our fingers, thinking, "What the hell?" That game was part of the first win in a run of 11 winless games, right? So there's another little thing about Newcastle United and about the way this season's gone. And we had a manager. We ended up at that point. We were 16th in the league. There's an interesting number for you, and we ended up with a manager saying, "I don't think we've turned the corner, but I think we might have." This is just like, you know, this is summed up Newcastle United. It's summed up the season. It's summed up the run of the management of Steve Bruce, with everything that could go right, going right, and going wrong, and being talked about and being trying to convince that we actually did quite well when what we're actually watching was a shambolic collapse, if you like. And that for me is just sort of that's been our season. And in that 90 minutes, we had so many highs, so many lows, and so many disasters. And I think we lived the season through that 90-minute game. Thankfully, we came out with the 3 points, and thank God we got those 3 points, because even though, I mean, looking back, a game where we finished the last 20 minutes with 9 men, having made all the substitutions, and then got a player after the sending off, a player going off injured in the manner that Shaw did. That kind of, where would we have been without those 3 points? When you think about it, you know, we're nervous enough, even though we know that we're looking. So, and I'm not going to say it, but let's just say that where we are now, where would we be? How would we all be feeling without those 3 points?
Bruce has still got the class to lose it, mind.
So that was my game, Steve.
Good stuff. Great games, great recollections as always. We always have our regular slots at the end of the show as well. Celebrity fans who follow Southampton through thick and thin, of course. Even cold Wednesday nights at Stoke. I don't think so. But here we go. Here are your celebrity fans. The panel have got to guess them.
David Frost.
David Frost, of course. Sir David.
Chris Packham.
Chris Packham.
Chris Packham.
I know her. I know.
Did you?
Lucy Pinder.
Lucy Pinder.
Yeah,
Pinder,
Lucy
that-
Pinder.
That's it.
This guy goes to every game, just not on Sundays.
Craig
Craig
David.
Big game. He played for
Well
them as well.
done.
Of course, he chills on Sundays.
Ed Chamberlain.
That's the
Yeah,
horse
the
racing
team-
guy.
The TV
Chamberlain.
guy, yeah.
Yeah,
Chamberlain.
Chamberlain.
Yeah.
Chamberlain.
And, last one. The guy in the middle.
Chancellor of the Exchequer,
Rishi Sunak.
Rishi
Yeah.
Sunak.
Rishi Sunak. Well, I've got one more. I have got one more. There we go.
The drummer of Coldplay. Will.
Champion. World champion.
There you go.
Correct.
Champion.
Clean sweep on the celebs. Well done,
Good,
lads. Players that played for both teams. Had a few here.
Barry Venison.
Venice.
Barry Venison.
Fitzhall.
Fitzhall.
That's all, yeah.
Shearer.
Big Al.
That
Leon Best.
one best.
Leon Best.
Leon
Best.
Mint.
Dave
Besant.
Besant.
Besant, yeah.
Besson, yeah.
Beresford.
Bez.
Bez, isn't it?
Beresford.
Egan.
Egan.
Is that Danny Guthrie?
That looks
Danny
like
Guthrie.
Joey Barton.
It's Mike Williamson.
Mike Williamson.
Do you know the strange stat about him, Mitch?
What, did he never played for?
Yeah.
Aye.
He never actually
I
played.
never played. I
That's
never played for them.
That's him in a reserve game.
Aye.
But he holds the record of being
Who was
signed
it?
for Mike Williamson.
Mike Williamson.
Signed for Southampton and never actually played for them in the first team.
Strange.
Ollie Bernard.
Ollie Bernard.
Fraser Forster.
The Foster.
Well done, lads. Clean sweep on everything. Well done. Give yourselves a round of applause. Excellent. So, teams, that's it. That's all we've got to do. Yeah, well done, Mitch. Steve Hasty, come to you for your team first.
Right, I've gone for Fraser Forster in goal, central pairing of Williamson and Fitzhall. Fullback were Ollie Bernard and John Beresford. I went for Danny Guthrie on one side. I went for Barry Venison in the middle. And I went for Mick Shannon on the other side with Keegan, Shearer, and a chap called Fawkes, who I'm sure George remembers.
Billy Fawkes, yeah.
Yeah, from 1950. And I thought, you know what? Anyone
Welshman.
That's right. Anyone who could put a partnership together with Jackie Milburn was good enough for me. So if you could put a partnership up with Jackie, then you can put a partnership up with Alan Shearer because he scored plenty of goals in that 1951 season.
Another great player who left Newcastle and didn't want to go.
Yeah.
If he'd come back to St James's Park, he would have given somebody a V-sign as well.
Yeah.
Because they drummed him out.
That's right. It was a name that my dad used to mention on many occasions when we talked about that sort of 51, 52, 5 team, you know. And he was one of the players that he always felt disappointed that never stayed because he always said that the partnership that he had up front would have been a tremendous one.
Absolutely.
Okay, Stu, over to you for your team.
It's very similar to what Steve's just mentioned. I picked Alan Pardew as the manager. Not probably a popular decision, but I like Pardew for biased reasons. Now, in goal, it was torn between Budgie because I loved John Burridge or Fraser Forster, but I picked Forster because he's the local lad. Then the fullbacks, I had Ollie Bernard and John Beresford. And then centre-half pairing was Mike Williamson and then one side, Fitzhall. And in midfield, it was exactly the same as what Steve mentioned, was Guthrie, Venison and Shannon. And then I give Leon Best the privilege of playing up front with Alan Shearer and Kevin Keegan. That's my team.
Okay, Steve Wilkinson.
Right, well, I'll put Budgie in goal. Same fullbacks, Bernard and Beresford. Alan Nielsen, I put it in the back, and with John McGrath, because he was one of the players when I first started going and was sound at the back. Midfield, Venison and Guthrie. Up front, Shannon, Keegan, Shearer, and I put in the guy called Charlie Wayman. George, you might have heard of, but quite a prolific goal scorer for both clubs. Sort of wartime, the end of the war. 53 games for us, 36 goals. 100 games for Southampton, 73 goals in 100 games. Amazing.
He's another one who happened to be there when there was so many good players around. I mean, there was Wayman, there was Bentley, Milburn coming on, and others. It really was a heyday. But Charlie Wayman fell out with the management, with Seymour particularly, and that was it. He was gone. He was gone.
Prolific goal scorer, and that ratio.
Albert Stubbins was around at that time as well. There was 5 or 6 who all eventually played for England. All ours.
And Pardew manager. So
Pardew manager as well. Okay, Mitch.
Well, I went with Pardew manager as well because I just couldn't go with Souness. It was like being asked if I would like syphilis or anthrax, to be honest with you. But in goal, I went with Budgie because I just have to. My fullback pairing were Alan Nielsen and John Beresford. Centre backs Fitzhall and Barry Venison. Midfield, I went with Guthrie, Ollie Bernard, and Steve Guppy. And then up front, I went with Keegan Shearer and Mick Shannon because I've got a big soft spot for Mick Shannon.
Good stuff. And George, last but by no means.
Well, similar names. Budgie for sentimental reasons in goal. Oliver Bernard, John Beresford. And then in middle of the field, Barry Venison, John McGrath in the middle with a name I don't know if any of you've seen it when you were researching, but Ken Wimshurst. Now, why would I have Ken Wimshurst there? Because Ken Wimshurst and I joined Newcastle together, and Ken was one of the lads who avoided Mr. Hughes, who used to run the juniors. Ted Hughes was great, and you just need to look at the players that came through our juniors. But he was a teacher, and he couldn't forget that. And some lads reacted badly to that. And Ken Wimshurst was one of them. So he went to see Charlie Mitten and say, "Look, get me away from him, or I'm off." You know. And so he was left. The 2 senior coaches were Benny Craig and Joe Richardson. And so Ken spent his time playing in the A team, in the Northern Alliance, and the B team in the Northern Combination, but never ever played in the juniors. And the net result was that, I used to see Ken at training, and odd times when I played for the A or the B team, we used to meet. And then suddenly it was George Dalton said, it was the name I've mentioned in here before, do you know Ken's been released? I said, no, I don't realise he'd been released. He says, well, he's been released and he's signed for Southampton. Well, the upshot was, less than 6 months later, Ken Wimshurst made his debut for Southampton first team. And yet he couldn't even get in the bloody junior team for us. He had to play with the dead legs of the A and the B team. And yet 6 months later, he's in the first team at Southampton. Had a good career with them, lost it with injury, but ended up being on their staff for quite a long time. So that's why I put Ken Wimshurst at number 6. And then Tommy Mulgrew at number 7, Danny Guthrie at 8, Shearer at 9, Kevin Keegan at 10, and 11, Billy Fuchs. I couldn't leave Billy Fuchs out either, as Steve's used it. A great winger on either side. He could play either side. A very clever player. So that's my 11.
Brilliant stuff. Great show.
Lad just put up there that Niall Ranger played for both clubs. I said I was going to put Niall Ranger as sub.
Yeah.
Anyone who's ever played Sunday League would know you would never leave him with a valuables bag. Never ever.
Allegedly. Rumour has it. Yeah, Budgie is virtually on every show every week, Keith. Yes, you're quite right.
Yeah, he's played for everybody.
More or less, yeah. More or less. Great show as always, lads. Thanks for taking the time to research, and big shout out.
Of doing it. I think of players that I know and I write them down. And for some reason, I could have sworn that Kenny Sanson played for Southampton. And I searched. Normally, if I can't find 11, I'll just ring Mitch and get some players off him. But Kelly
It's
Sansom,
weird. It's weird, and it is weird. Sometimes you think, "Oh, I'm sure he played, but he didn't," you know. But yeah, no, 9 times out of 10, you're right when you think it's John Burridge. Like, big shout out to Skips and Bins for coming on board. Anyway, there's all that details: 0800 254 5253. Enquiries at skipsandbins.com. www.skipsandbins.com. Easy contract, free and pay as you go. Waste collection, and they've also agreed to come on board and help the food bank. They're keen to make a donation to them, so I've put them in touch with Steve Hasty, who has put them in touch with the food bank. So a big thank you to them for that. Also, Spider VPN, great lads down there for your internet security, and to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle, and a Jab Signature. Thanks to all of you guys for sticking with us, and subscribe to the channel by hitting the logo in the bottom right hand corner. I am back tomorrow night, as always, on a Thursday with Supermac, and Gibbo is back as well from his 1 week sabbatical. So join us tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. I'm off for a quick pint of water and making a cuppa, and then I'm back on to do a BKB interview with Seamus Devlin. Looking forward to speaking to Seamus. He's going to tell us a little bit about sport and his ambitions within it. So that's at 7:15 live on the channel. But until then, I'll see you guys.
We're Brighton next week, is that right?
Brighton next week, yeah. Sorry to Tom Dixon. We've already decided it's Brighton next week. We will keep Bournemouth on the back burner though. But Brighton next week. So tune in next Wednesday, 6 o'clock for that. Take care, lads. Good night.
Yes.
Good night.
Bye.
See you, everybody.
Critics attack. It feels like I've been talking to myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna